All right. So, hello and welcome everyone. I'm Chelsea Dean from Tomo Club, and we've got Miss Courtney with us today. And there's words of you to mention all the things that Miss Courtney's been up to. She's the CEO and co-founder of Bridge Educational Engineering and is into SEL and mental health education consulting. She's also a licensed special educator. She's been in this field for years now and specializes in strategic services as well, right? And particularly in the field of mental health. Ms. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today at least. And it's exciting to know that we're going to be talking about SEL for teachers today, right? And especially when we're talking about SEL for adults, it's a different ball game altogether, right? When we've been uh, we've been a part of this community for a while now, and we know that we've been teaching students. And when we're talking to students, it's again a different ballgame altogether. I would love to know a little bit about you if you can share it with our audience, and would love to also understand what your understanding of this topic is.
Oh my gosh, Chelsea, I'm so glad to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation, and to Avinash as well for the invitation to chat with Tomo Club and learn about all your services. I'm excited. I hope you consider this like an equal fireside chat, because I'd love to know about your work too, because we're in it together.
Yeah.
Might see it from different angles, but we're in it a lot together. My work in particular from Bridge Educational Engineering involves partnering with schools around strategic, multi-layered SEL instruction, and SEL, as I mean social and emotional learning. So it's really about building the social emotional competencies of different constituents within the school community. So in some cases, schools will ask to co-construct student-facing programming, right? We're doing it together because as lovely and flattering as it was that Avinash said I was an expert. I'm not. I I work with experts. We are all expert in our own experience. And so working with schools that know their culture, that know intimately their mission and vision and goals, makes them the experts. We co-construct quite a bit student-facing programming. Could be different classes or learning experiences in and out of the classroom. Those learning experiences, another sort of like layer of the work that I do with schools is faculty and staff facing, adult facing, as you said, across the lifespan, because that is our educational group, or those are educational. I call them educational leaders, so not administrators, but when you're in a classroom and you're an educator, or your library or the cafeteria, you're an educator in my book, and a leader in that space. So those people who are in it and leading and modeling and supporting students building their social emotional competencies. And then there's an educator, like an administrator piece
Oh,
and family piece,
yeah.
right? Because families are also part of our community, our school communities. And we are all at different stages of finding the utility and the practicality of social and emotional learning. I get a lot of questions through Bridge about this being like a buzzword and what it used to be called, and why this feels so new. But as we know, it's not new.
Yeah.
And it is fundamental to the work we do in schools. So I am, yes, the CEO of Bridge, but I lead the consultation. So I work elbow to elbow with the educational leaders, and when I'm lucky, students and faculty and staff.
Right. It sounds like a lot, right? Like, especially when you're thinking about the number of stakeholders involved, not just, in the schooling system, but also in a child's life. I think that's where I connect SEL with when you're talking about how do we create, or at least how do we create like a wholesome environment for that child to grow. At the end of the day, the center of all of our SEL programs and all of our SEL uh, curriculums is primarily the child, right?
Yes.
They're the center of everything that we want to cater to because at the end of the day, they're our future, right? And one thing that even we found, while working with students and while working with educators, we found, and I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned that everyone's a leader in their field, or at least everyone's an expert in their field. Because again, how do you how do you understand someone else's context without them telling it to you, right? Without them explaining, the experiences that they've had, or at least
Mhm,
what are some of the visions and goals that they have for uh, their surroundings, or at least their community, right?
mhm.
So just building off of that, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about, primarily when we talk about SEL for educators or SEL for teachers,
Yes.
or adults, is the fact that we're looking at how these teachers, uh, how are we providing SEL to educators and teachers, right? What is
Mhm,
something that is absolutely required in this day and age for educators to have these different skills? And where is the gap maybe? Or is there even a gap in, the teaching styles? Is there a gap in the teaching styles? Is there a difference, I would say, in the way they present themselves in the schools or in the kind of community that they have? So what are the motivating factors? What are the hygiene factors, right? Especially in schools. So I would love to ask you, like, we can begin with that. Would love to ask you, what is one thing, you've worked in multiple schools, right, with Bridge? Uh, and one thing I would want to understand is, what are the most common areas, right? Areas of development that you've seen within the teaching community, or at least within the educators, the community that you've had to cater to, or at least had to, say, build a program for.
Yeah. So around what areas maybe is there the most the widest gaps, let's say, or
Right.
the most sort of like areas of friction? Yeah. When I think of painting the picture, if anyone's tuning in and just to name the social and emotional competency
Mm.
areas all together,
Yeah.
a great beginning place, of course, is self-awareness. Just what to the classroom or to these learning spaces. I call everything a learning space, Chelsea. I think of like, right, recess outside, that's a learning space. Oh, and I think most of us do, but I just want to be clear. So all these different learning spaces, um, in subject areas, in extracurriculars, who am I? So that's a great beginning point. I hate to skip over that, even though that is not sort of like the source of programming necessarily, but who am I and who am I becoming
Right.
as an educator? Because I mean, I think like adult learning theory, we don't just check the box and then we're a teacher. We become new people every school year, as we progress. But I'm not sure that we build in a lot of time to think about what that means for me and really set goals around that. In particular, I will say I've been teaching for many years, but people who've sort of like been in their classroom or their school system for very many years, or more veteran teachers, this can be especially overlooked. It can be hard to sort of like reinvigorate and rejuvenate. And I kind of I think I like to turn up the volume on self-awareness, because it's very empowering. It's the same thing that I think educators do for their students. And so I get to do it for educators and give them space to think about, who am I? How do I understand my identity today with these students? I mean, and the school year is beginning for lots of people right now in September. How am I different in this context, in this in the social environmental context of wherever they are teaching, the country, our world, but the country and state and city and so on. Um, that's one area. Decision making is an important one, as well as social awareness and self-management.
Yeah.
This last one though, relationships, which kind of hinges on all those other things, that's the one. That's the area where there can be so much friction. And how I relate to this most is because I think of like my first, it was probably my third year teaching. I remember digging in my heels and really kind of like trying to control things that were happening in the classroom. And the more I got pushback, which was natural and going to happen with high school
Mm.
seniors, the more I tried to like think of like I'm like controlling sort of like, we'll have assigned seating and we'll, more sort of like efforts to manage, right? You don't manage humans. you support humans, you relate to humans. And as soon as that light bulb clicked, which was a difficult one to click, I'll be honest, I remember I had to backtrack it, which brought me back to self-awareness and some of these other things. But it was around relationships, and it is around relationships that a lot of the work is done. The backtracking involved acknowledging my contribution to the tension that was going on in the classroom. And of course, then the interruption to learning that happens, and modeling that and giving space for students to acknowledge their part in it. And we kind of did like a couple of weeks into the year reset. We had to reset what was going on there. So I think it is cyclical, and those social emotional competencies are so interconnected. When it comes to self-awareness, it's really just like an ongoing build, I
Right.
think. And it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're with me.
I'm with you. Absolutely. It takes me back to when I was teaching, right? And
Yes.
I was an elementary school teacher, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, when I started off, but I still remember one of my supervisors was there in my classroom. She was just like going around observing what was happening in the class. And my students were, how can I put it nicely? They were just want to run away, right? Like they just wanted to do whatever they felt like doing. I wasn't in command of my class. That's what they would call, right? Like, how do you manage the class? Like, what is your classroom management strategy, right? And in that moment, my supervisor just told me to just stand still, right? Because I was just panicking with what was happening in the classroom, right? Like I was just going from one place to another and just, running around. My supervisor just told me, they're looking at what you're doing, right? These students are looking at you, they're mimicking exactly what you're doing, right? And from that day onwards, I don't think I've moved from my place every time I've taken a lesson, right? And I think that just that it's been years since that has happened, right? But I still recall that one moment and that one thing because I lacked the self awareness in that moment that what I was doing was impacting the students not in a very positive way because it was taking away from their learning time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and it's wonderful that you mentioned this now, right? It's been years since this has happened, but I'm sure every educator has had at least one such instance in their life, right, or in their teaching career where they have had this sudden epiphany that okay, maybe I'm the reason my class isn't listening to me, right?
Right. The social awareness, like how are they I love that you had a supervisor who was there with you, who
Right.
said, Let's try something else together. Let's try just being still and noticing and see how they respond." And building, the sort of, some people call it like a dance between teacher and student, but the strengthening how
Yeah.
you were communicating to each other. And you just stood still in that and took it in and watched how they adjusted.
Yeah. Right. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing in the classroom is going to impact what the students are also going to take back to their communities, right?
Yes.
Everything that you're, again, I don't think, or at least this would be too bold a statement, but we don't realize the impact that we're making in every class, right? Even whether the student is listening, whether they're actively or passively listening, they are taking something back, whether it's from you, whether it's from the lesson, whether it's from the interactions that they're having with their peers, they are taking something back. And that is so, so important for us to understand, right?
Mm.
And how are we responding to everything that is happening as well, right? What are your thoughts on this? Where do you think educators, or at least yeah, where do you think educators stand with this sort of awareness right now?
Right, right. You're reminding me of a time when I was working with young adults in like a post-secondary setting, so in college, university age youth. And many of those young adults were navigating some really serious mental health challenges that really impacted their attention and capacity to demonstrate. And by demonstrate, I mean like for someone who can perceive like visually, you would see that maybe they weren't showing some of the like kind of more typical signs of learning, engaging, head nodding, note taking, these kinds of things. Those were not markers of learning. and yet there is learning. It's such a strong reminder that people receive and digest information differently. And when you are anticipating, and this is for, I would say, like teachers, but then also educational leaders who are maybe seeking, hoping for, or expecting those same markers of their educators to show learning and engagement and these kinds of things, and they're not happening.
Yeah.
How to make room for these other ways that individuals express how they're learning and taking in information. It's certainly, I mean, there's a non-negotiable flexibility that needs to happen when we're talking about learning. It is simply not, I say this a lot, not meant to be always at a desk. I met with about 90 some educators last week on one of their professional development days before the start of the school year, right? And I invited them, like, this sounds kind of funny, but I truly meant, before we begin, that we're going to be together for a couple of hours. Before we begin, please know, in our time together, you do not have to stay seated. Sit on the ground. You may walk around. You can, there's freedom in how we and how we need to maybe move to take in information and stay attentive. So there's a remarkable flexibility that I think, as you were describing, or as you posed earlier, like where are some like pressure points for educators? I think lots of educators have these skills. I really do.
Yes.
I think sometimes though, maybe external pressures, performance, family expectations, district expectations, maybe like culture or tone of a school system, depending on leadership. Some of these, they can be dismissed, it's not structured enough.
Yeah.
And it makes some of us uncomfortable when it's messy. And I'm imagining your elementary class, Chelsea, like kids wandering around. Sometimes lots of learning is happening there. Yes, and it's so hard to judge. It's so hard to judge, So anyway, I'll leave it there. I don't mean to ramble, but how important it is that as you and I working with schools build in opportunities for educators. And I guess this probably, to go back to social and emotional learning, goes back to our self-awareness. How comfortable or uncomfortable are we with sort of like messy, untraditional learning?
Right. Oh, I completely agree. Right. I think I'm so glad that you brought this up because this just excites me. Because when we talk about untraditional learning, I think any sort of teaching practice that we have been taught, right, in our graduation and things like that, we've we've been told to have certain classroom structures in place, right, which are extremely important for learning. Wouldn't deny it, right? Very important for students to also gauge uh, what is really important for them, right? Like what is the area that they need to focus on. But when we talk about unstructured learning, or at least when we talk about a lot of uh, interactions that we're having with these students, the more uh, the more open the space is for the student to learn, the more they're gaining, right? I remember having, again, it's just making me reminiscent of my classroom, right?
I
Uh,
love it. Those
yeah,
are such rich examples.
yeah, because uh, again, we were talking about some mathematical concept, very simple, right? Like we were talking about addition, and my students, and I integrated SEL into the curriculum, right? Um, with mathematical concepts and everything. Everything had some aspect of SEL. Now my students were just learning how to count numbers and add numbers, right? And some of them wouldn't be able to sit like just calmly, and that was okay. They were just very, very young kids, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds. I mean, what can you expect them to do for like 4 to 5 hours altogether? But we had this very, very simple activity where they would just use like a clip to pick up sticks and put them to the, or give them to the other person based on what they could see on the board. Right? Very simple activity. But I still remember, and this was during my initial days as a teacher. I still remember the class had never been more quiet, more engaged, right? So when we're talking about learning and the space that we're giving them, I think one of the key factors that we often forget is how engaging is what you're doing, or how engaging is your lesson, or how engaging is uh, whatever activity you want to present to the student, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
at the end of the day, I believe that fun is learning, right? Or learning is fun or can be fun, right? It doesn't always have to be a notebook or a pen, or a book with yourself,
Right.
right? It can be, it can be done with any way that, in any way that you would want to present that particular topic, right? And it can just be fun. And I think that is one of the main theories behind, what we've built at Tomo Club as well, right? Like we keep constantly keep thinking about what is engaging for a student,
Yeah.
right? How
Yes.
do we get even adults involved, or how do we get adults to have fun with the students as well, right? So if they want to play a game with the students, they're able,
Mm.
right? They have full liberty to play the games with the students. They have full liberty to see, okay, this kid is having fun, but they're also learning something as they're playing, right?
Yes.
It may not have a lot of written material, but they're building their critical thinking skills. They're building their strategic thinking skills.
Yes.
And I also do the same thing, right? If I play with my students, maybe I'll be able to do the same thing, right? And I'm so glad that you brought this up, because it is also a segue into the next question that I had for you. But if you have any thoughts on this, I would love for you to share those.
I'm thinking about when you said classroom structures, you brought up curriculum as in the activities we're inviting. And I would say for many educators that I work with, categorically having students build, design, construct these words on their own, whatever it is, not only does it tap into like every area of social and emotional learning, but it can often be clumsy. I'm going to use some other words to describe it. It can be like sort of messy. If we have students working in small groups, they can work at different rates. All of those can be uncomfortable to manage or to like have to direct or orchestrate as an educator. You know, ideally everyone's learning the same way, the same thing at the same time. And that's ideal. And we know that doesn't happen. I can't say enough about some of the as you described, integrated SEL with curriculum. We know so many people can do this so well and teach people how to do it well. We know it's possible across any content area, you know, so there's a lot of hope there. Um, and then, you know, there are consultants like myself who work with schools and individuals around that. It's called instructional coaching. It's being with an instructor to navigate that. And in that process, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there is learning for the educator. It's not just about the curriculum. It's about their experience of designing the curriculum and integrating that. But another thing besides content that you had me thinking of when you said classroom structures is simply how a classroom is built and the design. I think of the like many years I've worked with different occupational therapists around classroom setup, but so much of this I learned during my time at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation when I remember like week one. Um, my boss, who's so in tune with environmental space, had me position my desk in a way that I did not, it was not set up as to invite like the hierarchy of you facing me and there's a desk between us. It's set up intentionally for us to talk and communicate and for there to be partnership and relationship. So what's very interesting, I think you got at this when we first started talking, Chelsea, about like how um, it can be different for adult learners to learn social and these social and emotional competencies, because those are, I think of like skills.
Right.
But there's a whole other area that I think could be the way in for some, because I don't mean that disrespectfully. Lots of us close off or pause, or learning for us can be interrupted for lots of very normal and natural reasons, it becomes challenging to teach when the social emotional competencies have limits. We see that. Um, so that's not to dismiss why it's not there.
Yeah.
But it can be a challenge. Anyway, the structural pieces of a classroom can be the way in. I think of like sometimes even posting what we have on the wall, our accolades can sort of message hierarchy where we sit, what's hung on the wall, what in our physical spaces invite collaboration and partnership, and like you said, fun, you know, showing self and sharing self, pictures of family, these sorts of things. But anyway, I wanted to kind of like put a little pin in case you wanted to say anything else about
Yeah.
just the structural piece is so important, the physical structure.
Yeah, absolutely right. And just to bring us back to when we're talking about like structures as well, uh, we're not just talking about like our infrastructure, right? Like our physical environment. So I'm also
Yes.
talking about structures where you would want to have like set timings for, the kind of learning that you want to provide, right? Which
Yes.
is equally
Yes.
important at the end of the day, because
Yes.
you're trying to provide certainty to the students, right? You're trying to provide certainty to yourself as well. Absolutely. But again, how do you bring about a balance between that sort of uncertainty, uh, and how do you bring about a balance between becoming too rigid or becoming too flexible, right? It
Mm.
needs to be like there's a very gray line, I believe, when we talk about these when we talk about the uh, I would talk about the psychological structures that we're trying to create in the classroom,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
uh, how do we become a little more flexible compared to just thinking about, okay, this is how it needs to be? How do we start
Mhm.
learning? I would use that term because that is something I think a lot of us and a lot of uh, the community also requires to do, right? How do we get out of a very traditional way of learning, which is again not wrong, right? There is
Mm.
nothing right or wrong at the end of the day. But, or at least when we talk about this particular space, when we're looking
Not
at,
for everyone.
well,
It's just not for everyone.
it's
Yes.
not for
Yes.
everyone, right? When we talk about learning, there is a lot of unlearning that us educators, and not just educators, but even school leaders and other administrative staff also need to go through, right? Like that sort of process is extremely cumbersome, I would say, for the least part, right? And when I would directly jump to this part where we think about what are some support structures that we can
Mm.
create uh, for educators, for school staff, for everyone who's involved in a child's life, so that
Mm.
that unlearning can be smooth, right?
Mm.
That unlearning can be comfortable, right?
Mm.
So yeah, what are your thoughts on it?
I don't know if unlearning can be comfortable.
At least
I'm
have a
imagining.
supportive environment for that.
Yes, yes, yes. Where it's like it's encouraged and
Yeah,
possible.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Don't you wish that for every educator, right? That they have a leader, a supervisor
Mm.
who is what I think I would be looking for is modeling this, someone who can model decision making, like these are the structures this is how the day schedule will go. We can also um those supervisors and leaders also they have trusting relationships with their educators, that they give them agency to decide, you know, most days we are going to follow this structure. Today, and in partnership with students, I'm acknowledging this is not working, right? And we ask students. I ask my 6-year-old all the time. I asked him when he was 4 and 5. He knows when something's not working.
Yeah.
And to invite a shift, I think that's the flexibility you're talking about.
Mm.
It does take a leader to set the tone with that. You know, that it is critical. I think you're describing this not just in terms of our physical environment, but that other infrastructure or structures that are in place create secure home bases what we would call like psychologically safe workplaces, and for educators and leaders and for students. We need that. So we need to know, but we also need this like malleability.
That's it.
It is like a tall order, right? I mean, our educators and leaders are precious and they work so hard. This is what they're working at, is trying to strike the balance, because it is difficult to please all, um but I think what I hear you saying, I think moving the needle forward in education does involve increasing some flexibility and giving people tools and ideas for how to support one another in that.
Yeah.
Which is also to say, if you and I are co-teachers and you're and you, my job is to support you.
Yeah.
And your job is to support me in a way, but you and I will operate differently and navigate something differently. And I need to trust you and talk to you. Where were you going with that? And we said, this is what we're going to do. And then you went, you know, and to be able to talk about it, ask questions and watch and trust and learn and be in it with someone,
Yeah.
and not for always that like spectacular lesson plan.
Right.
Sometimes we learn in the messy
Right.
mistakes. We learn when it didn't go well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Completely agree. Thank you. Thank you for, I think, just breaking this down really well, right? And malleability was the word that I was looking for. How do we create that malleable? I would not call it a boundary, but that malleable space, right? Where students and teachers and everyone who's in that space is able to grow at an exponential rate with the kind of support that everyone can provide each other, right?
Mhm,
How can we
mhm,
feel safe, as you mentioned, in
mm,
any space that requires us to feel uncomfortable, right? Or at least,
yes.
especially when we're unlearning.
Yes, yes, yes. Um, and maybe I'm kind of thinking beyond K-12 here. I'm thinking a little like higher ed as well, where there is like there is a tangible competitiveness that is there in academia. It can be there,
Yeah.
that can sometimes drive relationships between educators and educational leaders. That someone's right, or someone's been trained more, someone has better relationships, which we know all of those are simply unhelpful as we're talking about building a culture that is supportive, where I can feel like I can come to you and say, Chelsea, I know you asked me to design the lesson plan and I'm not prepared to do it. Can you help me with it? Or, Chelsea, um, I changed the plan and it didn't go well. And to show where we make mistakes. Or Chelsea, I'm really struggling with how to respond to this student. Um, or I'm struggling as an educator. I'm struggling like with what how I'm showing up. And um, I think that if I may share, I think that there's like a willingness to be wrong and show all of self that can get really challenging to do in a competitive environment, especially, and I'm thinking about educational leaders who are supposed to, I'm using air quotes, like lead um unrelentingly, maybe some of the support you're talking about is from all layers. Let me kind of like toss it on its side, like all of it, like accordion out all of a school community to be learning with and find opportunities to learn with. Um, there are some programs that I've been called in to support educators who are perhaps because of their choices, like at risk to not keep their job, and we simply go back to these social emotional competencies and think about who they are and how they're showing up in different spaces, how they're being a supportive colleague, and how they're ultimately showing up for their job,
Yeah.
which is supporting students.
Right. right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is being talked about right now in this
Yes.
is about teacher burnout, right? We're talking about teacher burnout a lot now. And especially when there's a drastic shift that's happening in the world with the kind of technology that is coming in, with the kind of changes that we're going through environmentally and psychologically, the students are being exposed to different sort of uh, to different things, right? Beyond our imagination at times. Uh, I would love to understand, how have you had an opportunity to create or at least work with schools that are catering to teacher burnout, or at least that are supporting teachers who are burnt out or at least are on the verge of, burnout.
Yes, I think that is often a starting point, actually. I think. And I would call it like it has different names, like our teachers, have reached different frustration points, or um, they're feeling like like for many of them, I'll say for educators who have been teaching like pre-pandemic and lockdown, that the student body has become so different, or the culture in their school has become so different, that they're like feeling upside down about it, and it's like really hard to navigate. That is totally
Right.
part of a storyline for most schools. You too? Would you say the same in Tomo Club? We
Yeah.
didn't even get to talk about you and all the great work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It is,
Will you
right?
tell me?
Absolutely
Yeah.
is one of the major things that we talk about with schools, right?
Yes.
Funding. So one of the things that we start off with is about how teachers don't feel motivated enough to be there, right? To be in a space where they had come excited to be in, right?
Right.
When they were excited to be in a space where they wanted to create a kind of impact that they had imagined to create, but they were just
Yeah.
stuck in a space where they just didn't feel valued enough, right? And that primarily may not be just or just regarding the school or the kind of schools that they might be a part of, right? It's
Right.
sometimes way beyond. It's not just about the school, right? And this is just one very, very small part of like a bigger problem, right? We're talking about what are some of the hygiene factors that uh, are present for teachers to feel comfortable at their jobs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What are some of the motivating factors for them, or are there any motivating factors even present at their jobs, right? And this is just directly from like a two-factor theory, where we're talking about, you know, we talk about salaries and the compensations as just being part of the hygiene factors, which is just maintaining your job, right?
Yes.
Then we talk about like your uh, then your motivating factors where you're being rewarded for the good work that you're doing, or you're being or your learning is being reinforced in some form or the other, right?
Yes.
How are we providing that to them? And I think that is one of the things that even Tomo Club keeps reiterating. How
Okay.
do we create a system of reinforcement or even a reward system in a schooling system that doesn't feel forced, right? That,
Mhm.
oh, I need my class needs to have the highest percentile, right? Or at least what is like a natural way of feeling like I belong here, or at least what is a natural way of feeling that this is what I wanted to do, right? And I want to continue doing this because it's going to impact this child's life or these children's lives.
Mhm.
So yeah, that is definitely one of the very I would say it would be a small piece to begin with, right?
Mhm.
As you had mentioned earlier, self-awareness and self-management is the first module that we teach, right? Or at least we present to our teachers when we're talking about professional development. We talk about how self-awareness and especially when we're looking at self-awareness, we start talking about mindfulness a lot, right? Even when you're present in the classroom, right? What does it mean to be mindful? What does it mean to be fully present, right? Of
Mm.
course, it's not easy. It takes practice, right? It's not something that you learn in a day, or it's not something that you just get up and you're like, okay, maybe this is what I want to do today. I want to be mindful today. You can do that, but do you know the techniques to ground yourself in a space where you have a child shouting at you at the like in the classroom,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
Do you
mhm,
have the sort of tools that you can use for yourself, not just
mhm,
in the classroom, but in any aspect of your life that makes you feel like, okay, I'm good. I can handle this situation through and I just
mhm,
need a support. I just need some form of support for myself as well.
mm, mm.
So yeah, that was a short, you know, insight into what we've been doing as well. How do you set up a culture where we know that it is okay to
Yes,
be upset about something, right?
yes,
It is
yes,
okay to fail, and that is something that even our students know, right? Like, and we're extremely proud of it. That it is okay to fail, right?
yes. And
And
you're the expert who designed this content for Tomo Club.
well, happily so, right? Because
Yes.
at the end of the day, looking at the students talking to each other, and I can't even imagine the kind of impact it makes on the educators. Educators are a little resistant to making mistakes, right?
Mhm.
They want to be right. They they just want to be right, right? Especially if they're playing games. They're very competitive. I think, yeah. Either they're very competitive or they just give up, right? That's the extreme that we've seen. But we've had certain educators coming and telling us, this was so fun, I forgot I was
Mm, I know.
right.
Yes.
And just the feeling of being okay with failure, right? That in itself exposes you to some sort of growth or uh, a growth mindset that you're at least building for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Mm-hmm.
able to do it with the students, right? And we have our students telling each other, it's okay, it's fine. You didn't win this time. Let's try this again, right? Maybe
Yeah.
let's try another strategy. Maybe. Do we adults take that time out to think of what different strategies can work for us if something is not working out?
Right, right, right.
If
You're
we have,
reminding me of that. Oh, I'm so sorry. Were you
yeah, go ahead.
you're reminding me of your example of like being in the middle of the swarm of your elementary students and how powerful it is in those moments that we are seeking support from our students. I mean, that's another form of partnership is to wonder out loud or to like share our experience or feel out loud. I am so stuck or I am so frustrated here,
Yeah,
right? Like just sharing relevant information about the experience.
absolutely.
Um, and sometimes even tying it to our next step as leading in the space, which could also happen for educational leaders. I'm really not sensing this is working. I'm wondering out loud here if the next move is and laying out some options, but deciding with or deciding out loud can invite some partnership. I think it can turn on for those like youth around you when you were teaching to be like, oh my goodness, Miss Chelsea
Yeah,
is feeling stuck. That can turn on
right.
their empathy and their partnership. How are we going to help her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you'll always have that one kid in your class who's listening to you, right? Who's nodding their head, even if they don't want to, right?
Yeah.
You'll always have that one kid in the class. Of course, you're not going to be dependent on them for the entire lesson. We're not talking about that. But you'll always have that one kid in the class whom you're teaching for, at least,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like having, it's almost like a ray of hope that you have for the entire class, like that one child,
Mhm.
sometimes, not always, I would say sometimes. But like this brings me to the next point when we're talking about when we're talking about SEL programs for adults, right? Or at least professional development for adults on like in the same lines of SEL or social
Mhm.
emotional learning. What do you think can be the short term and the long term impacts of these programs in maybe their teaching careers or in their lives?
Mm. Yes. Well, I mean, I think some of what you were naming earlier about their workplace satisfaction, um, First off, that is so generalizable to any workplace. One of the first things I did as in this, like when I started this business, was a local chamber of commerce asked if I would run a workshop on that, like workplace satisfaction, how you partner with, and sort of like some of what you were describing earlier, like kind of make sure that your values are aligned with the values or mission of an organization that you're a part of. Um, Kind of getting in touch with the motivation factors and why you're there and what you're doing. But it boils down to satisfaction. When we don't feel satisfied, we are looking for something else.
Yeah.
Um, you asked though about how educators are, how we are kind of like tuning in, turning on some of these like social emotional competencies for educators, and what's the short game or and like short term outcomes and long-term outcomes. I really truly see and hope this is always true, that satisfaction will be kind of like woven through all of this, that it's a continuum. The more sad, and that it's got a ripple effect as well. The more satisfied I am coming to work, probably, the more likely I am able to partner with and spread the satisfaction and connection to my colleagues. The more in tune I am with what is satisfying about the work, where I feel I'm positioned in work that is aligned for me, the better I might be able to notice it in others and uphold that, or where it's not true for others, be with them in that experience. Um, I think, there's always, I wonder if there's in any organization enough friction that happens for individuals that can kind of also have a ripple effect into small and then maybe even larger groups where dissatisfaction is really loud. And I think that when we do well to um, hone our social and emotional competencies personally, we can better prepare ourselves to maintain health promoting boundaries with that, so that the ripple effect, the negative ripple effect, we are kind of, preserving ourselves from that and able to name it and move through it productively, and also keep our eye on the ball of what we are called to do and be with students. I think the long game is, or maybe this is both the short and long, the is like retention. It's really like keeping our educators who are really good at this. I'm not joking, Chelsea. This group of 90 teachers that I was with, they were celebrating their very first day, some of them, and their 35th year, some of them, 35 years, same school. And so I think of this whole continuum, and where everyone is in their work, but they were so on fire with like what they do. And I asked them for their why. What are you doing here? I told them very honestly why I was there.
Yeah.
And they were so good at naming this. Like, I was built for this. I was called to teach. I love partnering. I I believe in the work. They had so many different ways of naming this, but their satisfaction was on fire. There were also, I mean, it wasn't, nothing, no organization is perfect. There are also challenges that are really, I think when there is satisfaction, a little more willingness to work through them. And that was some of the work we do with Bridge too, is partner with schools to identify and troubleshoot around the challenges. And it takes all different shapes and sizes. Avinash knows this, and so I'll tell you too, that one of the first things that I fumble over is like how to, like, the elevator pitch of Bridge Educational Engineering, because I like for it to take so many different shapes. I like it when a school says, could you meet with a couple of teachers, observe them, give them feedback, and help them integrate more social and emotional learning? Could you build a class and help implement it? Could you build a program for families or whatever, around whatever area? I think it's important because it's coming from the school. They're saying what they need, and we go in that direction. You do the same thing. I've seen Tomo Club do the same thing. You pivot and grow it. It's so beautiful.
Right. Because at the end of the day, if a school leader already has the awareness of what is happening in their school or what
Mhm.
is happening in their community, they're already one step ahead, right, to bringing the entire community together, right?
Yes.
Especially when we're talking about, and which is extremely crucial, right? And I'm glad that you mentioned this as well, because at the end of the day, when we're looking at school leaders and when we're talking to school leaders, we're trying to understand what is the core need of their school, right?
Yes.
Even if we are presenting or if we're giving them an already set curriculum, we're still asking them what is the need of each of the children in your classroom,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Uh, just because there is a curriculum that is presented to you, a set lesson plan that is given to you, it doesn't mean that each child is going to learn from it. You might have to include other resources, or you might want to include, or you might need to take additional support for each child in the classroom,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So, since school leaders, or at least a lot of school leaders, passionate school leaders that we've encountered till now, have that sort of awareness of what is going on in their schools or what is
Mhm.
going on in their community, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Understand that there are certain needs that have to be met in their surroundings, right?
Mhm.
They're not just implementing SEL for the sake of implementing SEL or because it is just required,
Right.
right? It is a mandate for them. They're
Right.
implementing the right SEL programs for their schools because they believe that it's going to solve a problem. They
Yeah.
have a vision in mind for any curriculum or any program that they're taking.
Sorry, I almost had to sneeze.
Yeah.
And then you are also very skilled, and your team at Tomo Club at then helping them navigate that,
Yes. Right.
and fine tune it so that it is more individualized, even though, as you're saying, there's a curriculum to it. Yes.
Exactly. So what we do is you mentioned about parents also, right? Like parent
Yes.
engagement, and how do
Yes.
we even create resources for parents to also learn, or at least or have workshops for even parents to learn about what social emotional skills uh, are for them and for their kids, right, or for their students. Now when we're
Yeah.
talking about that, we create snapshots or individualized reports that are sent to the parents after every class, right?
Yeah.
So that we're talking about the same things that we've spoken about it during the session, right?
Mhm.
But we know that, okay, maybe there is this one child who requires some extra assistance, right? Or at least some extra support at home that the parents and the impact that a parent can make with that child, with that particular topic of discussion. Say, for example, we're talking about opportunity cost,
Mhm.
right? Again, it is something that a lot of us have learned very late in life, right? And we're teaching this to fourth graders or fifth graders right now. We're saying that um, they've learned it in the classroom, they've practiced it in the classroom with the kind
Yes.
of game that they're playing, with the interactions that they're having. Then we send back a report with the moderator or the SEL experts' comments, right? Saying,
Yes.
"Okay, these were the things that your child has done during the session. These were the bright points, and these were maybe some of the areas of development that this child can, work through, right? Can you help us, or do you have suggestions for this? These are the suggestions that we have for your child, right?
Mm.
Sounds like a collaborative effort for the growth of that particular child,
Right.
right? And we also send like collaboration and action pieces. This is what we call them, because we want the student to collaborate with their parent as well, right? We would want them to sit with them at the dinner table, talk about, okay, this is what I did in my class today. Have you had moments of, uh, where you've had to choose between just two options that were equally exciting? What were the
Right.
trade there, right? Very, very simple example, but we've had parents come back to us and tell us that their bond with their student or with their child has just expanded, right? Has
Improved. Right.
has
Right.
improved. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's the word. Right? It has improved. It has made it stronger, right? Because
Yes.
they have the understanding that, okay, I know what my child is up to, right?
Mm.
I know that if they're learning this, maybe I need to get myself up to pace as well, right? Because everyone needs to be on the same page at some point. Right?
Mhm.
Not
Mm.
not everyone can be reading different books every time. So yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah, you're giving them questions to ask too. It's so often like youth can report out when they go home or expected to report out, but it's different when there's a question to ask. I'm being more of an investigator and like, do you run into this?
Yeah,
This question that you posed for then your example,
yeah,
it turns us it's more inviting.
it is.
I
Absolutely.
could chat you all day. I know it's time, but you are
Please,
so lovely, Chelsea. And I'm so
please, Courtney.
grateful for like learning with you and thinking about our educational systems with you, and how our work is complementary in a lot of ways,
Right.
and I've said this since I started Bridge, there could be one of us on every corner,
Yeah.
and there may still be a need for more. There's so much that we want to be able to provide our educators and educational leaders who are really, we need them. We need them. They're special and we need them. So let's keep them well and keep them skilled and keep them connected and satisfied.
Yeah. I think you've
Yeah.
summarized it really well at the yeah, I mean, extremely well. It was so insightful to speak with you. I think I'm taking a lot back from this conversation. And one of the major points that I'm going to be taking back is about the space, right? About
Yes.
how a safe space, and that is something that we also believe at Tomo Club, but just you reinforcing that with the kind of experience that you've had in working with the number of educators, administrators, and students that you work with, it's extremely validating, I would say, say. Uh, and additionally, I think just thinking about, and I would leave this question for everyone who watches this later, would be to think about how do we create a support system for everyone in the school infrastructure, right? Or at least, if not everyone, for individuals who require that sort of support, right? And how do we become a little more open to, uh,
Mm,
right? Even, no matter how old we are, right?
thank you.
So,
Well
yeah,
said. Well said. Thank you, Chelsea.
thank you so much, Courtney. It was wonderful speaking with you, and it was so insightful, and my heart is full. Yeah,
Same. Thank you.
thank you. I'm going to stop the recording now.